too bad for losing an hour's sleep. Some of you did bring your coffee with you. I hope you're enjoying it. If it helps, go right ahead. Bring it in. All right, let's just dive right in. 1 Peter chapter 1. Here we go. Therefore, with your minds ready for action, be sober-minded and set your hope completely on the grace to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. What he is saying here is you need to be alert and sober. He's saying, don't lose focus on this. In other words, don't be daydreaming through this. And the context in what he's saying is look, don't be naive to the friction, to the issues that your faith is bringing to your life. There's going to be cultural challenges that come from being a Christian. He's saying, don't allow that to affect you in the wrong way. Be aware of those challenges. And then he says this, as obedient children, do not be conformed to desires of your former ignorance. In other words, don't go back to living an unholy life, but as the one who called you is holy, you also are to be holy in all your conduct. For it is written, be holy because I am holy. So things you need to know about this. 3 things real quick. Number 1, this call to live a holy life, it's just not for clergy, it's just not for missionaries, it's for every believer. We are all called to live a holy life. Secondly, the standard of this holy life is not other people around you. In other words, you're not called to be more or less holy as those around you are more or less holy. The standard is God. You're to be holy just as He is holy. And third, this is expected. What's implied in this verse is that you can do it. You can be holy just as God is holy. That's why it's a command. It's something we can do. How can we do that? Because we've been given a spirit of holiness. But living a holy life is difficult. It's hard for a lot of us. Why is that? First reason is this. We don't want to be the oddballs. We want to fit in. We want to look like everybody else. You see, Peter is writing to people who they live their whole lives right there in the same place. Now, they become Christians. They're still living in the same neighborhood, the same culture. Everything else is the same. But now, they're starting to look a little bit strange. They're starting to look a little bit different because their values have changed. Their thought life, their attitudes have changed. And so, what Peter is saying to them is that, it's what the New Testament says a whole lot. In fact, you look at the New Testament, it's surprising how often it addresses the tension that exists between us Christians and living a holy life in the midst of the same culture. Because the culture hasn't changed. We have become somewhat strange. That's why Peter addresses these people. He refers to them as exiles, strangers, aliens. Because now they look different. Now they act different. And the problem with this, we don't want to look different and act different. We want to be like everybody else. We don't want to be oddballs. Don't believe me? You who are 67 years old, look at your high school yearbook. Look at the shorts you wore in gym class. Your shorts were up to here. Your socks were up to here. Bell bottoms. Did I say anything else? We all want to fit in, right? But here's the question. Do you really want to look like everybody else? Is that what you really want? We want our lives a lot of times to look like beer commercials. We all look good. Everybody around us looks good. Nobody really has a real job. There's no debt. There's no worries. We're just all having a good time and enjoying life. But when you see people like that, you see commercials like that, you're just looking at their highlights. You're looking at the highlight reel. You don't know what's really going on. You're looking at them from a distance. You're looking at somebody else's life from a far end. You don't really know what's happening up close. You don't know that behind those closed doors, there's arguments going on almost all day long. You don't know they just spent a year in rehab. You don't know they got addictions going on that's just sucking the life out of each other and their family. You don't know they haven't had sexual intimacy in years. You don't know that they're estranged from their kids. You don't know the guilt, the scars, the shame, the hurt that's there. Just take a look a few months ago, that trial of Johnny Depp and Elizabeth Heard. Anyway, I just seen the highlights of what was going on there. And you realize, oh, they're movie stars. They've got it made. They're living this great life like a beer commercial. No. And there's a lot of hurt going on behind those closed doors. We are called to live a holy life, different, set apart. And you need to realize that this is going to cause you, living a holy life, is going to cause you to begin to look separate from the world, to look different. So quit trying to craft a Christianity that never upsets anybody. Quit trying to craft the type of Christianity that doesn't set you apart from the people around you. When you become a Christian, God does a work inside of you, and you're just going to look different. You will be set apart. You will begin to look strange to the rest of the world. So there's always this tension because we don't want to look like the oddballs do. But that's what happens in the Christian life. God does work inside you, change you. It does such a change in your heart that you're just going to be different. And what Peter's saying, lean into that. Don't push back on those differences. Don't be naive. Lean into those differences. Be holy as God is holy. The second reason that living a holy life is so difficult is we don't know what holiness is. Here's what we read out of Leviticus chapter 11. For I am the Lord your God. So you must concentrate yourselves and be holy because I am holy. Do not defile yourselves by any swarming creature that crawls on the ground. For I am the Lord who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. So you must be holy because I am holy. This is the law concerning animals, birds, all living creatures that move in the water, all creatures that swarm on the ground, in order to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, between the animals that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. What's he saying here? He says, in order to live a holy life, you have to simply distinguish between what's clean and what's unclean. We live in a culture that declares everything's clean. But you need to understand, you can't live a holy life and let the sewers of Hollywood flow through your mind. And here's what people say. Yeah, I know that's not probably the best, but that really doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother my conscience at all. I'm able to handle that. And when people say things like that, they're able to live an unholy life in the midst of an unholy culture and say, my conscience doesn't bother me. I say that's a total misunderstanding of what a conscience is and does. A conscience only sets off alarms according to convictions that you've established. And if you haven't been in God's Word to establish convictions, of course your conscience isn't going to be setting off alarms. You have to be able to distinguish between clean and unclean if you want to live a holy life. There are some things you just can't do, say, think, and be a part of anymore. So not only do we not understand what holiness is, we don't understand where it begins. So here's what we don't know where it must start. Here's how to mark. For from within, out of people's hearts come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, thefts, murders, adulteries, greed, evil actions, deceit, self-indulgence, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a person. So what's that? Where does holiness begin? It begins with us, inside, with our thoughts, our mind. If you want to be holy, you cannot have an impure thought life. And the thing about that is that we're probably the culture more than any other that's more concerned with outward appearances than what goes on in the heart. But you can't be holy and do that. So it's difficult to be holy because we don't want to be oddballs. It's difficult to be holy because we're not really sure what holiness is. We're not willing to make a distinction between what's clean and unclean. And we don't know where holiness begins. It must begin in the heart. But here's another big one. Nobody stumbles into holiness. Oh, we hate this. We hate this idea. Why? Because we like infomercials. How many times you watch TV and all of a sudden you watch a program and then you think you watch a commercial, then you realize this is a 30-minute infomercial. And what's it about? Buy this bottle of pills and this will just go away. It'll just be gone. Buy this contraption. And in 6 weeks, rock hard abs. And you're thinking, great. I want one. I'll even get expedited shipping because I'm going to the beach in 4 weeks. And if I do 25 minutes a day rather than 15 minutes a day, I'll have rock hard abs. See, we think holiness is just going to happen. It doesn't just happen. Nobody stumbles into holiness. The truth is that you build up over time what you become. You do, I had this thought I was going to, maybe I'll just forget about it, but the truth is you will cultivate over an extended amount of time what you become. Let me put it this way. If you're not cultivating holiness in your life, sin is coming in and grabbing a hold of you. And you will wind up doing things that you never thought you would do just a few years earlier. Surely you know this. Surely you've seen this. Surely you, to some extent, you probably experienced this. You're a senior in high school. And you look back and now as a senior in high school, you're doing things that as a freshman you didn't think you'd ever do. As a junior high, you knew you'd never do. And guess what? When you get to college, you're going to be doing things in college that you never thought you would do as a senior in high school. And it goes on and on and on. Why? Because you don't just stumble into holiness. It has to be cultivated. It doesn't just happen. And here, this is what read at Colossians 3:5. Here's the thing that we have to understand. If you're going to be holy, you have to be putting some things to death. You have to be killing some things in your life. Here's what read in Colossians 3:5. Therefore, put to death what belongs to your earthly nature. Sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desire, greed, which is idolatry. And he goes on and on about that idea. You have to be putting some things to death. Or literally you say, murder what's earthly inside of you. You have to have this rage-filled violence towards sin. You have to be ready to kill it. To be violent against it. You can't let that hang around. And you see, the thing is, the carnal person, and we'll talk about carnality more in a minute, but the carnal person, they don't want to put sin to death. They just want to make it their pet. Let me teach it how to beg, how to stay, how to shake, how to roll over. And then what happens is that they're going along, and they're sort of doing okay because the sin is now their pet, but the sin rises up in their life. And it begins to cause destruction and take over. And you go, wow, how did that happen? Well, it's because you never hated your sin. You tried to make a pet out of it. And they'll go through cycles sometimes in life over and over again. The sin will come up and rise back up in your life and cause all this destruction. Then they'll tamp it down, okay, and it'll go okay for a little while, then rises back up again. Why? Because they don't put it to death. They just make it a pet. So I had a show on Discovery Channel. You see reruns of it. It's called When Animals Attack. And I will confess this morning, I liked the show, but I had to stop watching it. Because I felt so guilty, because most of the time I'm cheering for the animal. And I think, I'm a pastor. They're getting mauled to death. I should have more compassion for people than that. That shouldn't be happening. But then I think, it's the same thing when the stupid tourists would come up to Alaska and they would go try and pet a moose and get mauled by the moose and trampled by the moose. And anyway. I'm trying to recover from that. So they had this commercial that they were making for watches. And they bring in this adult male lion. And they bring this model who's going to be modeling the watches next to the lion. And for the first little bit, things are going okay, and all of a sudden the lion just turns and just goes after her. I mean, it doesn't last long. It lasts 3 or 4 seconds, maybe at the most. But she's torn up now, because it doesn't take long for adult male lion to cause a lot of damage. And people are going, how'd that happen? And I'm thinking, it's an adult male lion. Nothing hunts a male lion out in the wild. So maybe people, nothing else. They'll take down an elephant if they're hungry enough. And all you did was put something a little bit tempting in front of that male lion, and it just did what male lions do. It'd be like if you gave me a bowl of jelly beans and set them on my office desk, and I may not eat them right away because I just came back from lunch. I'm stuffed with catfish and ice cream and everything else. I'm just not in the mood for jelly beans. But sooner or later, I'm going to dip my hand in the jar and I'm going to get some jelly beans. Well, all you did is put jelly beans in front of that lion. Maybe at some point he says, no, I'm not in the mood, and not ready for that. But that lion was in the mood for some jelly beans that day, I guess. Maybe he was in a bad mood. You know, animals have bad moods too. Whatever it was, he just attacks. And people are going, how'd that happen? And people do the same thing with their sin. They'll take and try and make a pet out of their sin. And teach it to beg, roll over, and shake. And then the sin rises up, and what does it do? It tries to destroy them. Why? Because it's in sin's DNA to destroy you. Sin has within its DNA your destruction. It wants to mess with you. It wants to kill you. And you think you can make a pet out of it? Back several years back, we had a guy, and I'm sorry for using Alaska illustrations, but the last 22 years of my life, but rest assured, you guys, you give me some good illustrations. I just had to wait a little bit of time to pass before I use them in the sermon. So this guy comes up, his name's Timothy Treadwell. He was an actor or whatever, he kind of wasn't very good at it apparently, but he decides he's a bear whisperer. So he starts coming from Alaska in the summertime. And what he does, he goes bears and he gets in their personal space. And I'm telling you, not every year, but almost every year, I found myself in the personal space of a bear, just being out, doing what I do out in the wilderness. And there's a bear, and I don't want to stay in that bear's personal space. But apparently he thought, hey, it's okay. We get along. I'm a bear whisperer. It'll be all right. So he had put himself in the personal space of bears. And I'm not a prophet, as far as a foretelling prophet, as if you'd have to be for this, but I remember getting in church on Sunday morning and saying, Bear Boy's going to get his one of these days. And about 3 months later, sure enough, he and his girlfriend put their tent out right next to a bear trail, out on the other side of the Cook Inlet, where there's just brown bears. Black bears don't even, they're not even on the picture, but there's a bunch of brown bears, and one came through, and there wasn't much left of them. Just gone. And they, of course, the bears guarding and killing all that. But anyway, we won't go into more detail. But here's the thing. Same thing with sin. As with a bear. As with any other wild animal. It's within their DNA to guard, to protect, and to kill and eat. And you want to mess with that? You want to think you can make a pet out of sin? Sin has within its DNA your destruction. It wants to take you out, and you want to play with that? It's not good. It will never wind up to be good. To be holy, you have to have this violence towards sin, is what Paul says in Colossians. You have to kill it. So you take that back and you hit it. And you hit it again and again and again. And you keep on going. Now it's down on the ground, but it looks like it still has a little breath in it. No, you kill it. You hit it again. And when you think, okay, it's not moving, it's dead, you hit it a few more times for good measure. You kill it. You want to live a holy life? You can't start you send your pet and think you can control it. No, you have to kill it. Dead. All right. Switch gears just a little bit, because this is what I want you to understand about holiness. Peter is not calling the culture out saying this is how you should be living. He's calling Christians out. And this is important because we live in a day where the Christian culture, we want to tell our culture around us that they need to be living holy lives. When really what needs to happen is that we need to raise our standard of holiness. So, when my younger son was living in Fairbanks, Lisa and I would go up and visit him in the wintertime. Didn't like Fairbanks, didn't want to waste my time this summer being in Fairbanks. But we would go there in the winter. Why? Because just outside of Fairbanks is this place called Chena Hot Springs. And you could go out when it's 10 below zero and get into the hot springs. And, it was just so refreshing. And so we'd spend a couple days there in Hot Springs, which is not really here there to the story, but anyway. So we're leaving, fixing to come back home. Got to fill up with gas. Because gas stations aren't open in the wintertime like they are in the summer with all the tourists, and so it's a long way to the next gas station. We got to fill up. And so our son has this 50 cents off a gallon on his shopper's card from, I call it Kroger's, Fred Meyer up there. And so you get up 35 gallons, so he needs gas, I need gas, so we're following him to the gas station to fill up the gas and both get 50 cents off. So you fill up one tank, and you just hold it there, the other car pulls up to the other tank, and do that. So we're on our way to the gas station. Now here we get to the point of the story. He turns the corner in front of us. Now you need to understand, all winter long, all the roads, they're just iced over, snow-packed and everything else. He turns the corner in front of us, and when he does, his rear end comes out and it starts sliding sideways a little bit, and he straightens up, and it's not a big deal. But as a joke, I get my cell phone out. And he says, "What are you doing?" "I'm texting him to slow down." And Lisa says, "You're texting while you're driving to tell him he needs to be a better driver?" Do you realize he's going to realize that you're the one texting him and he's going to call you out on that? But I'm just kind of messing with him. So, yeah, I do. Well, I did, and he did. He called me out on that. What are you doing texting while you're driving? So here's the thing. That's often what we do. We're texting while we're driving to tell people that they need to drive better. And what Peter is saying is that, look, he's not calling out the culture to live a holy life. The Bible never says to the culture, you need to live a holy life. It always talks to Christians to live a holy life. Here's what we read from Paul. Paul puts it this way: for what business is it of mine to judge outsiders? Don't you judge those who are inside? God judges outsiders. Remove the evil person from among you. So who's going to judge all those people out there in the world? Maybe God is. But what I want you to realize is that it's not our job. We are supposed to be encouraging each other inside the church to live a holy life. Revival is not going to come because we stand up and we start telling the culture around us to live a holy life. Revival is not going to come when we make sin illegal. They tried that in the Old Testament. It didn't work. Revival will come when we as Christians begin to live like Christians. When we raise our own standard of holiness. The negative example of this is Samson. The story of Samson takes place during the time of the Judges. Now, the Judges is a period of history between when Joshua dies to the monarchy, about 330 years. And what is going on during this 330-year period is that God had told Israel, you go to the promised land, you drive all the Canaanites and all the other tribes, you drive them out. They're wicked. They're immoral. You don't want to leave that in there. It's like the kill and sin type of thing. You get rid of it. You kill it. I don't care. Don't leave it. And so they're doing pretty good. When Joshua dies, they said, we're getting tired of fighting. let's make them our slaves. And we'll just make slaves out of the rest of these tribes that are left over here in Canaan. Bad idea. Because they're immoral idolatry and worship and all the filth they had going on, that began to influence the Israelites. You know, it's kind of notice when you step in a mud puddle, your shoe gets muddier, the mud never gets shoeier. That's the way it works. That's the way it works with the world. They will always have a negative influence on us if we let that in, let that inside our lives. And so what would happen is that instead of Israel oppressing those other tribes, they rose up and began to oppress Israel. And so they began crying out to God. God, we're sorry. We repent. We'll turn back to you. Just help us here. And God would send a judge to help them get back on top, to help them defeat the enemies that they were facing. And this was a cycle over and over again, except when it comes to Samson. When it comes to Samson, it's different. They're not rising up and saying, God, we're sorry. We repent. What they're doing is that they're compromising themselves and they're blaming the Philistines. All those Philistines. Can you believe them? This part may sound vaguely familiar to you. Can you believe those Philistines did? They took prayer out of schools, those Philistines. Do you believe what those Philistines did? Man, they got all this filth coming out of Gaza wood on our TV, and it's just everywhere. Those Philistines, I can't believe that. They took my stuff. They just come and took my stuff. And they would just complain about the Philistines. The problem is not the Philistines. The problem was the Israelites decided to live an unholy life. That was the problem. They decided to let all the filth of the surrounding nations that they didn't drive out come back into them. That was the problem. And Samson wasn't a lot of help. Because Samson, he lives his whole life with a worldly perspective. Doing what's right in his own eyes, just like everybody else was doing. Here's some things I want you to learn from this negative example of Samson when it comes to not living a holy life, when it comes to carnality. And here's the first thing. The result of the unholy life is not loss, it's just lessons. See, because when you read Samson, the story, you read about the supernatural birth. You read about his Nazirite vows. You read about his supernatural strength. And there's just this anticipation that's building. You know, you can't wait for Samson to rise up like William Wallace and paint his face and put on a kilt and yell, freedom! Let's get rid of these Philistines. It never happens. Never happens. The only thing that happens is that he gets this little petty back and forth with the Philistines. This revenge type of thing going on. Here's what we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 1. For my part, brothers and sisters, I was not able to speak to you as spiritual people, but as people of the flesh. Or my word, that word is the other translation, carnal. As babes in Christ. I gave you milk to drink, not solid food, since you were not yet ready for it. In fact, you are still not ready because you're still worldly. For since there is envy and strife among you, are you not worldly and behaving like mere humans? See, carnal is that word to describe Samson. That sums up his life. Now here's what I want you to understand about carnal people. Carnal people aren't necessarily lost. They're saved. But their life is much less than what they could have been. See, carnal people, they will occasionally experience a miracle in their life. They will occasionally experience God showing up. But the results of their life will be more like a ripple rather than a splash, just a small little ripple that's just gone, rather than something that has a lasting impact. So they're not lost. They're just far less than what they could be. And here's the thing I want you to also understand. The carnal believer does not inspire others to take God seriously. See, what Samson does with the Philistines, he does alone. 20 years he was a judge. He doesn't inspire anybody to follow after him. He doesn't inspire anybody to take God seriously. I mean, what if Samson would have rose up and said, okay, let's get rid of all these idols we got in our lives. Let's get rid of this filth we're letting flow into our culture. Let's stop going to Philistine cities and sleep with Philistine prostitutes. Let's start living a holy life. Who would have followed him? Nobody. And that's the thing. When you live a carnal life, you're not going to inspire those around you to be holy. You're not even going to inspire those in your family to be holy. For 10 years, I pastored college churches. Let me tell you about a very, very, very consistent conversation I would have. Before the fall semester, the parents would come to church and bring their kids in tow. They're getting ready to go to college. And they were such a great part of the youth group, and they're going to be such a great part of your student ministry. And in a couple of weeks, after college starts, they're nowhere to be found. And then their parents get word back through friends or whatever else that their kid has sort of just abandoned God altogether. So they call me panicking. And do a little bit of research. It's easy to find out, well, God is not God to them. Maybe football is God, or soccer is God, or partying is God, or living like everybody else on campus is God to them. But it's not God. And if by chance you have a chance to dig just a little bit further, what you discover is that for 18 years, mom and dad taught that kid they don't have to live a holy life. They don't have to be fully committed. You know, it's okay. There can be a little bit of unholiness and carnality, and it is, you know, just keep it under control. You'll do okay. And now they're panicking because they didn't take God seriously. Now the kids aren't taking God seriously. Here's the third thing. Living an unholy life is not an act. It's a path that begins with little compromises. Compromise is a slippery slope. It's like a slow fade. Jim Collins wrote the book From Good to Great, and in it he talks about the ethics of these high-powered executives in companies, these CFOs and CEOs. And he says, if you'd gone to these guys and said to them at the very beginning of their leadership in the company and said to them, let's cook the books and get rich, they said, you're crazy. But they start out here, and let's say point A, and they wind up here at point Z, totally off the hook with their morals. Doing things completely wrong, unlawful, costing bunches of money and jobs. And his point is, how do they get from point A to point Z? Well, you don't go from point A to point Z. You go from A to B, from B to C, from C to D. Pretty soon, you wind up waking up here at Y. There's a Y, it's one small step to Z. It starts out with small compromises. Just a little bit of honey. That's all. Just a handful of honey for Samson. Just a little view on this website. Let's look at a few pics. I'll just flirt a little bit with this other person that I'm not married to. And you begin doing things and wind up in a place you never thought you would be. And you don't get there overnight. Slow compromises. Why? Because you make a pet of that sin. And you think that it'll be okay. And sooner or later, you're going to find out in the DNA of that sin that you think that it's not that big of a deal, it will destroy your life. Completely destroy it. And next, living an unholy life always comes with a price you can't afford to pay. See, for Samson, harvest day came, and it wasn't pretty. You read the story, and I'm assuming most of y'all agree with the story. We didn't go over it per se, but Samson, he winds up with his eyes gouged out. He winds up in a pretty bad place. But here's what people say. Again, this is, I hear this. This is what I do in talking to people. They say, nothing's bad happened yet. It'll be okay. I'm going along, and yes, I know it's not quite right, but nothing's bad happened yet. And besides, if it does, I can handle the consequences. Here's what we read in Galatians 6. Don't be deceived. God's not mocked. For whatever a person sows, he will also reap. Know this. You can choose your sin, but you can't choose the consequences of your sin. It's going to take place. And when he says you can't mock God, he's not saying you can't mock God, like you can't do that, it's going to do it. No, he's saying you can't mock God and get away with it. You can mock God, but you're not going to get away with it. Payday will come for any Christian that chooses to live an unholy life. Because this is what we were called for. This is what God has enabled us to do. To be holy just like Him. And when He says that, He's not playing some game with us. He's not going, let's try and see them do that. This will be fun to watch. No. He's given us that ability. And God takes it seriously. FDA. Y'all familiar with the FDA, Food and Drug Administration? One of their jobs is to watch the purity of your food. But you need to understand, their standards may not be as high as you think. Because we have coffee drinkers here, right? Do you understand if 10% of the coffee beans are infected by insects, they just say, nope, can't sell that. 10%. So 9% insect infected in coffee beans, they're okay with that. I hope you are, coffee drinkers. If there are 20 or more live maggots of any size in 15 grams of your dried mushrooms, you got to throw them out. 19 live maggots is okay, just not 20. If 13% of your fig paste contains insect heads, can't sell it. 12%, you're okay, just not 13%. In fact, it tells us we consume 1 to 2 pounds of insects and maggots and mites a year. The average person, they don't realize it. So let me just ask you this. That's their standards. What about your standards? How many maggots is okay for you? What's your standards when it comes to holiness? There are people like Samson's parents. There are people who are just waiting, longing for you to become a godly man, a godly woman, and to rise up. They're hoping you'll be a person that puts sin to death. You don't try to make it your pet. You put sin to death. You don't complain about the Philistines and what's going on. Instead, you raise your own personal standard of holiness. And when you do that, it's going to have an effect. But sitting there and complaining about it is not going to do a whole lot. But when you're ready for revival, you will get serious about holiness. About your own personal holiness. And you will take a look at those pet sins that you have to keep in your life and keep them tamed and keep them under control. And you'll begin to let God do the work in you. When it comes to your anger, to your pride, to your bitterness, to your unforgiveness, to your grumbling and complaining. And you'll begin to understand that God wants holiness to begin in my heart, in my very thoughts. And He wants me to make that distinction between the clean and the unclean. experience God. And I'm not saying you're not a Christian. I'm not saying that at all. And you will still experience God in life from time to time. But it will be far less than what it could be if you chose to be holy. And you'll have the influence that you want to have on your family and those around you. So, how many maggots are you happy to have in your life? You say that's okay. What's your standard of purity? Are you as pure as those around you are more or less pure? Or are you pure as God is? That's the standard. It's time to live like it. So as we have this time of invitation, you guys can come on down. As we have this time for invitation, you may just want to stop and say, God, I've been a Christian for far too long. I just let things in that shouldn't be there. And now you're ready to do something about it. Stand up and grab that word of God, and grab that fat rivers, and you need to kill that sin. And you kill it, and you keep hitting it until it's dead, and you just keep hitting it some more. Because you don't want that ever coming back. That's what's called. That's what God has called us to do. To have this life of holiness. And maybe you're ready to commit your life to Christ. You never have become a Christ follower. You never have declared Him to be the Lord of your life. And you're ready to make Jesus that Lord of your life today. You can do that too. Just come and say, Pastor, I want to make that decision. However God is speaking to you today, please just don't continue to be okay with that pet sin and that unholiness in your life. Let God do something in your heart today. Let's stand together.